Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this sunny afternoon here in the UK. And welcome to the latest in our series of webinars where we're sharing our experiences on how you can deploy Google's cutting-edge AI into your contact centers. Today, we're going to be looking at a relatively new but incredibly exciting use of AI, which is to assist contact center agents when they interact with customers by suggesting knowledge or next best actions, or even automating entire workflows, which allows agents to focus on delivering a great customer experience in the most productive way. And this is through a feature set that Google refer to as Agent Assist. My name's Stuart Dorman. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer here at Sabio, and I work very closely with the team at Develop, who are Sabio's next generation technology practice and are one of the world's leading experts in Google's contact center AI technology, as well as specialists in Twilio's communication as a service platform. And I'm joined today by Tom Mullen. Hey, Tom, are you there? How's it going?
Hey, Stu. Yeah, good, thank you. You? Looking forward to this.
Yeah, likewise. So Tom is the CEO of Develop, and Tom and the Develop team have been behind some of the world's leading deployments of Google's CCAI technology over the last 12 months or so. And Tom and his team joined the Sabio group at the beginning of March to help us bring this cutting edge AI and contact center technology from Google and Twilio to our clients. I'd like to encourage you all to ask questions throughout this demo. You can ask questions obviously in the panel next to us, and I'll be putting those to Tom as he runs through the demo. So please feel free to reach out at any time and we'll do our best to respond. Now, we've seen some incredible advances in the areas of natural language understanding over the last 12 to 18 months. And that's really been driven by the application of artificial intelligence and more specifically machine learning to drive the performance of speech recognition and look at synthetic speech, and more importantly, the understanding of intent and the ability to extract useful information from human speech and human interactions. And the pace of this development shows no sign of slowing down. And this has been supported more recently by Google's decision to formally package their AI technology specifically for the contact center with their CCAI suite. And CCAI consists of two primary functions. Firstly, we can use conversational AI technology to engage directly with customers, either through speech recognition or chat or messaging channels. And Google refer to this as virtual agent. And what we can do is use this to complement or replace, traditional graphical or touch user interfaces, as well as providing automation through pure conversational channels such as messaging, voice, web chat, and so on, enhancing the ability of IVR platforms. And we've seen a huge interest in this technology over the last couple of years. And Google's entry into this market has really shaken up the landscape by significantly reducing the cost of this technology, opening up advanced AI to a much wider range of organizations. Tom and I actually ran a webinar on this just a couple of weeks ago, and if you weren't able to join that, but you're on this session here, we'll post the link to that session so you can have a look at what we discussed at that point. And what that will show you is just how easy it is to get up and running with this technology. Today, however, we're going to be focusing on the second use case for this technology, which is the implementation of AI to support contact center agents through Agent Assist. And this is a more recent capability. And Agent Assist is designed to continually and in real time analyze the conversations between the customer and the agent. And the underlying AI can then surface key information through prompts to assist the agent through whatever process they're going through. And this means that the agents have information at their fingertips to answer the question without spending time navigating through systems, searching through screens to try and find the information that they need. And there are many, many use cases for this, everything from suggesting knowledge to help a customer with their inquiry, maybe filling in key bits of data, monitoring compliance, maybe real-time coaching of agents, or surfacing next best actions as the conversation progresses. Now, really the focus of this is to help agents to do their job more effectively. We know that demands on agents are increasing all the time. All of the simple calls are disappearing through digital transformation and automation, and this requires agents to be able to handle a broad spectrum of use cases. Secondly, we know that training of agents takes a lot of time. A typical agent can take many, many months to get up to speed and reach their full performance. So anything that we can do to help them, with that training process in real time is going to be really beneficial. We also know that agents have too many systems to navigate. It's a perennial problem that we see in contact centers where lots and lots of different applications are being used, and that can really hinder agents when they're trying to find the right information or fill forms out, and it gets in the way of delivering a great service. And finally, and obviously, we're all more demanding as customers now as well. We're getting used to these frictionless experiences. So being transferred around a contact center or engaging with an agent that doesn't quite know or have the information to hand that we need can be very frustrating. So the agent assist technology is really designed to help agents to do their job more effectively and have a better experience with customers. So now I'm going to hand over to Tom, or introduce Tom into the conversation. And what Tom's going to do is to walk through in real time how we can actually start to build out some of these workflows. So Tom, over to you.
Thanks,
How's it
Stu.
going?
Yeah, thanks, Stu. Very good intro. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through a little bit around Agent Assist today. So last time we ran the webinar, we were very, very heavily focused on virtual agents, so how we can quickly spin up a virtual agent to use in a chatbot or IVR style in front of our human agents. But oftentimes we'll find that the customer of ours needs to be escalated and actually speak to another human. Agent Assist, as Stu said, is really focused on providing tools to the human agents to better solve customers' problems, and also to solve some of those other challenges around training and making sure that they're abreast of changes in information or kind of regulatory requirements, right the way through to more fully automated agent journeys through next best action. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the configuration first of how we got things set up. So the first thing that we have to do to start to use Agent Assist is obviously we're leveraging Twilio and CCAI here, but we have this notion of a conversation profile. So a conversation profile is a primitive within Google CCAI, and it helps us to manage state during the conversation. So I've set one up. They're very, very easy to set up, and it doesn't take a lot of time at all. It's rather filling out this form. And in these two parts of the conversation, the first part is really aimed at the virtual agent. So for the virtual agent part of the conversation, we can choose a dialogue flow agent that we're going to use. We're not going to focus on that today. Rather, we're going to focus on the human agent assistant parts here. So this configuration will allow us to dictate on any given channel for any given agent at a given time, what information or underlying AI do we want to use to be able to help service them more effectively. There's two key areas that I'm going to focus on today. That's FAQ style agent assist and then dialogue flow assist. So we'll focus on FAQ first because that's really the path of least resistance where we'd recommend people to start on their agent assist journey. The notion of using FAQ assist is actually to be able to surface answers to the agent based off customers that based off questions that the customer is asking to help reduce the amount of time that an agent might go searching in a knowledge base or having to find that information from elsewhere, and really allowing them to focus more effort on actually solving the customer's problem. So this setup is really very straightforward. There is a prerequisite of this setup and is creating a knowledge base. So I can just show you quickly how that would be done. I have set one up ahead of time because it takes a couple of minutes to ingest the information, but you would quickly create a knowledge base. There's only two fields. You select the associated dialog flow agent, and then to that knowledge base, you'd add some documents. So the documents actually provide the underlying data source from which the FAQ questions and answers will be extracted. I have used one that I've just taken from the internet here. It can ingest an entire URL, so I've just passed it one of this URL here. And to show you how we would do that, it's quite simple. FAQ style documents, choose the FAQ, paste the source, and then press create. It takes a few minutes to ingest, so I'm not going to run it again, and I already have that inside the knowledge base now. So the next thing after that, once we've created our conversation profile, is actually to associate that with a given channel. So we want to tell which channel to use this conversation profile at any given time. We're going to be using web chat today. And again, I've kind of pre-configured this, but very, very simple. So we just selected the default conversation profile, the locale with which we'll be operating. If we were to be using speech, then the automated synthesized voice that we want to use, and finally associated that with a given entry point. We can add it to new entry points. So if we want to use that across a different channel like Facebook or SMS or voice, we very easily can do. And it really starts to solve this challenge of build your conversation once and deliver it across many channels. And in this case, through Agent Assist, also deliver it across many channels to the human agent as well. So I'm going to show you how that actually works in practice. The setup has taken, several minutes to do, and I can show you what this looks like if a customer is coming to speak to an agent. I'm just immediately going to ask to speak to an agent. Speak to an agent. And this should create a task for us. Hopefully that's going to get delivered to me. Here we go. So information comes in. We've collected some very, very basic information from the IVR. And now the customer is going to ask one of these questions. So, can I buy one-day car insurance? Here's the customer tab. Oops. And what should happen now, as you can see, is it's ingested that question from the customer and automatically populated the agent UI with some prompts from the knowledge base. And you'll see that it's picked up the first one most accurately, and that corresponds exactly to this, this FAQ question over here. Now, within the UI, we have the ability to look more deeply as to what that actually means. So yes, okay, fantastic. The agent now has the ability to provide the information very, very quickly to the customer, but equally as important to make sure that the tools remain useful for the agent. They have the ability to feed back to the underlying machine learning model. So if they say it's helpful, then it's going to boost the accuracy or the chance that this answer would get surfaced if the same question is asked again. So creating a continual feedback loop is very, very important when we're looking at building, fully established agent assist solutions to make sure that we are providing with them tools that actually add value to their day-to-day. So that's really the simplest way that we can start to introduce agent assist. And as you see, I think we've taken about 5 minutes to get it up and running. Very, very simple. The depth of the knowledge base will ultimately be the value add or the deciding factor as to how much impact we can have to the agent's workflow. And the kind of from here, what we would do is start to identify what the next steps in this agent assist process are. So if we're looking at FAQ as very much a day one thing, we can get something stood up very, very quickly and start to provide information to the agents in real time. What are the next steps? How do we move on from there? How do we extend this functionality? And that really brings us over to a more complex model, which is actually using a dialog flow agent for the human agent assist piece as well. So I can show you how we'd set that up, and then I can show you how we can use our dynamic context panel on the right-hand side here to start to surface kind of next best actions for the agent over and above just more basic knowledge and FAQ articles. So to do that, very, very simple, we'd go back to our conversation profile that we set up before, and all we have to do is change the type of suggestion to dialog flow assist, and we'll choose the related dialog flow agent that we want to use. And that should now be using dialog flow assist instead of FAQ assist. And I'm going to show you a bit of a more elaborate demo, and then I'll unpick that and show you how it works, and also some of the benefits of the approach that we've taken and the tools that allow you to build out these kind of dynamic agent experiences quite rapidly. So first things first is to close the existing chats. We will start a new one, and this is because every chat session is associated with a given conversation profile. So when we start a new one, or rather when we change the conversation profile, we have to start a new session. We can't change the profile midway through a given session. Stu, do we have any questions coming through so far?
Nothing coming through at the moment, but please do post some questions if you can. If you've got any questions around some of the stuff that Tom's showing, as I say, we're more than happy to answer them. And Tom, just one quick point here. You showed this example on chat, but this can be used on other channels, so that could equally interject and suggest a knowledge article, for example, based on a conversation over voice that was taking place. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So again, using the same conversation profile, we already have a couple of voice numbers set up here. If we wanted to use that FAQ style assist, we'd simply switch on the CCAI, choose the conversation profile, update this automation profile, and then that would associate those voice channels with that conversation profile, and you get the same VA and agent assist experience across voice as well. So the flexibility
it's a bit like having an experienced supervisor there listening into the conversation at the same time and offering suggestions, you know, whilst the customer's engaging with the agent.
That's right. So much as we just saw it via web chat there, it would be the same via voice. Rather, we'd be ingesting the media from the customer's voice stream into the underlying AI and then surfacing the FAQs based off that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I've done the configuration and I'm going to speak to an agent again. And in this particular case, I'm going to kind of replicate getting a new policy for a car and go through some of the steps and show you how we can use several intents to actually change the agent interface. So new tasks come in, and the first question from the agent would be, how can I help you today? And from a customer, it would be looking to get some new car insurance. Okay, can you tell me what car it is? So no intents have been triggered so far, but at this point, the customer is going to provide the registration. And what should hopefully happen is, great, cool. So what we've seen there is the UI is automatically updated. So we've identified the intent because we're using Dialogflow as the agent assist now. And from that, we've queried the fulfillment API, and I'll show you the flow of information in a second, to then go and look up that registration and pull in some details about that given car. Another example would be, thank you, what is your address? Address. I'm just going to give the postcode. Postcode is. And similarly, very the same approach there. So we've looked up the postcode and we've actually been able to populate a map in real time. The very cool thing about this panel here is that no HTML or CSS or particular design was required. This is all just generated dynamically through a little bit of JSON that's passed back through Dialogflow. And I'll show you exactly how we do that in a minute. I'm just going to show you the final couple of elements that we can display, and then we can go into the detail of how we actually generate those elements and how we can use them to create richer environments and interfaces for our agents. I think the broad aim of the solution is to move away from the concept of having, you know, a single agent interface. It's more like, this is your agent interface for this agent and this customer at this point in the conversation. So things become very, very fluid and very, very dynamic. And the panel on the right-hand side can act as a bit of a stream of information that's valuable for the agent that they can then interact with as well if they want.
And Tom, you've mentioned
yes.
you've mentioned Dialogflow a couple of times there. Could you just explain a bit more about what Dialogflow is and how it enhances the capabilities over the standard kind of FAQ stuff that you showed at the start?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just run through these last couple, and then I'll show you how we've actually built this. So how we pulled this together. And I think the thing that people should be surprised about is really how quickly we can do that. So as you've seen, the final part of the process here is understanding how long that they want a policy for, and then being able to surface the policy that we think is relevant, and providing the agent with tools to then go ahead and complete that purchase. So really allowing the agent to focus on solving the problem rather than going into back office systems to look up information based off a piece of or an entity that's been collected during the conversation. So the information here has just been statically delivered, but we can easily extract postcode, car registration, and things like that from the conversation and use those to trigger fulfillment from within inside of Dialogflow to then go and fetch information from a customer's API or underlying CRM. So just to give you a bit of an overview of how this actually works, obviously the message comes in from the Twilio channel. It hits Dialogflow, which is then delivered to a fulfillment API. So this fulfillment API could be a function, it could be a web service, it can have deep integration into your existing CRMs, and it handles the standard fulfillment requests that get generated from Dialogflow. And based off the intent, it will then return the response which it thinks is suitable. And I think the really powerful thing as well here is it's also responsible for building the UI. So all of the UI that we've seen built here on the right-hand side isn't done in the client end. It's actually the fulfillment layer, the fulfillment service here, which is returning a set of relatively straightforward but pre-formatted JSON blocks, which are then rendered by the UI when they get passed back into Flex, the agent interface. And all of that kind of comes out of the box. So there's no extra kind of UI building design or anything else to do. It is a case of you can really start to focus on building out that journey, that agent kind of tool set day one without having to invest lots and lots of time in the infrastructure to make the whole thing work. If we were starting from scratch, it would be just the setup that we've done here and then standing up a relatively simple fulfillment service to handle those underlying intents. So what I'm going to do now is kind of peel back the covers and show you actually how we made this and kind of to prove that it's not hundreds of thousands of hours worth of effort for our customers to get to this stage. Rather, they can really start focusing on building out the intent model and then driving this UI from the fulfillment engine. So because we're using Dialogflow, and Stu, to your question, it is the kind of the heart of Dialogflow Agent Assist, as well as equally if we want to use a different Dialogflow agent for Virtual Assist. So as you can see, I've just got some very high level intents, and the training phrases that I've provided for them are very, very shallow, just for demo purposes. So if we look in the order through which we went, I think the first thing that we asked for was the car registration, and that has matched to this car lookup intent. Now, the intent itself is pretty standard. There's nothing extraordinary that you wouldn't expect to see in here. So some basic training phrases, and the webhook is enabled. So this, coupled with these actions and parameters, are the most important things, and that's ultimately what's driving the agent interface. So if we just come back to this diagram a minute, so we've received the information into Dialogflow. Dialogflow has determined an intent, and it's sent it over to the fulfillment API. The fulfillment API then understands that there's an action and parameter here, which is telling it to render a particular sync template. So this is just a notion that we have of passing a bit of information between Dialogflow and the underlying API. And I think this bit where we can dive into just a little bit of code. So if I can find the car details. So when that intent gets triggered, we're just going to respond back with a basic Dialogflow context. And inside of that context is this simple JSON. So this simple JSON here is what will actually get rendered in the UI as these components over here. So you can start to see how easily you can build out these interfaces very, very quickly. And then through entity extraction from within inside of Dialogflow, you can make requests into that CRM to look up customer data, to find out that customer record, to identify that given policy, or whatever it may be that's specific to your business, and then very, very quickly surface them to your agents in real time, in line with the conversation, and all of that with having to write a very, very small amount of code. I mean, this is probably the absolute least amount of code that you could write with any basic fulfillment from Dialogflow, and it all follows the same principles that Dialogflow has as standard. So the same kind of schematic of the fulfillment request and response. So very straightforward.
Tom, a couple of questions coming through here. So first question from Bobby is, can we use this to identify who the caller is, i.e. be taught to understand names of people and places and stuff like that?
Yes, absolutely. So that's kind of a part of Dialogflow in itself in entities. So an intent typically comprises of several different parts, and one of those parts, and a key part, is the training phrases itself. So within a training phrase, we can specify the natural language that sits around it, but then also identify a given entity. And to give you an example of that, we could say, this is totally unrelated to car lookup, but we could say, please send me the policy details tomorrow. And it's identified that tomorrow is actually an entity. It's a representation of a date. And that could be somebody's name. It could be a license plate. It could be an account number. It could be a reference number. And what Dialogflow allows us to do when we define these entities, we can then extract those out from the natural language. So if the customer in this particular case said, can you please send me the policy details on the 25th of June 2020, then we would be able to extract that key part from the natural language and use that within inside our API to go and perform some business logic. And that really applies for both the virtual agent and agent assist part of the conversation. So if we were to build this with dynamic data, when the customer provided us with their registration, we would have been able to extract this information from what they've said in natural language and then go and do a database lookup from our fulfillment API. So rather than just rendering this static data here, it could be, well, we'll just extract that registration number from the fulfillment request and then go and do a lookup, and then kind of through code build this JSON structure, which is then rendered back to the UI.
So I guess just to summarize, we can either do that before the call hits the agent in the first place. We can identify, verify them to try and save some time for the agent handling aspect and drive more automation, or we can use it to identify elements of the conversation, such as name, address, and all the other things you've mentioned, to kind of drive forward and drive efficiency within the conversation itself.
That's right.
We've got another question here as well. How can other staff, such as complaints handling or quality management, replay or view the history of these interactions?
Yeah, really good question. So because it goes through Dialogflow, there's multiple ways that we can analyze this. Dialogflow does present us with the notion of history, so you can actually go in here and understand what happened during the conversation. I don't have a demo environment to show you today, but we also, as part of Airline as a platform, have a in-depth kind of BI and insights package that really allows you to see on a turn-by-turn basis exactly what's happening. So right down to what was said and the intent that was responded, but also you can understand what the JSON format that was replied back. So from compliance standpoint and kind of any regulation or historic analysis, you would be able to see which intent was triggered and exactly what information was then surfaced to the agent UI. And the agent UI is obviously just consuming that information and delivering it in a pretty format.
Great, and I guess we can also use this information to tag to the calls for future reference, whether it be through a speech analytics or a workforce optimization platform. But we can, you know, assign outcomes to calls for future reference if we need to as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we talked at the beginning about creating this a bit of a incremental journey from start with the very basics around FAQ powered agent assist, and then work your way up to something that resembles a fully fledged end-to-end tool that can complete a given journey for the agent. There's lots of steps in between there, and one of the key and obvious ones is around that regulatory piece. So being able to do some of that regulatory and compliance checks in real time, and associated, obviously we can leverage sentiment analysis within here and also surface that to the agent in real time if we deem that that's going to add value to them. I think one of the kind of conceptual things that we need to bear in mind when we're building out these solutions is that we don't get too carried away with them. And the aim is really to make sure that we're incrementally adding value and that we are continuing to add value and not just create noise for the agent. That the end goal is ultimately to allow them to really focus on the conversation that they have between themselves and the customer, and the tools should kind of do the hard yards of looking things up and going fetching information for them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any more questions you want to go through?
Nothing more coming through at the moment, but please, as I say to the audience, feel free to fire any more questions through. Okay,
so I'm just going to talk a little bit more about this interface actually. What I've shown you here is the ability to create a stream of information. So as you saw, as we're going through the conversation, new tiles were effectively being delivered from the top of the pane. And each one of those maps to these sync items that we provide here, these predefined templates. There are a number of different templates that we have, again, that kind of come out of the box. So profiles, cards, maps, timelines, calls to action, things like this. Again, just providing a relatively established template library for people to use and get up to speed very, very quickly, so they don't have to spend time on rebuilding UIs. Now, this way that we've delivered it today is called a list format. we can also change the way in which we want to show this agent to the customer. So let's say, for example, there was another use case where we wanted to maintain pretty much the same UI for the duration, but change one or two component parts of it as we go. Leveraged on top of some of Twilio's sync functionality, we have the ability to use an approach called map. So what we'd do there is create a UI, and each element of the UI would have a unique key. And if we wanted to just change that particular element from a given intent, we could reference that key and then change just that element. So we didn't have to kind of rebuild the entire UI, or we didn't have to feed more information or create duplicate tiles as a stream of information comes in, but we can just update a given part of the process. So a good example for that would be maybe identification and verification. So let's say, for example, that this block here was part of ID and V, and they'd come in and provided was with two of the three things they require, or maybe one of the three. As we ask them for identification and verification, as we kind of step through each one of those extra entities and pieces of information that we require, we can very simply update this screen without having to create another element on top or rebuild the whole UI just to change that particular element. And the process is exactly the same. So we'd go through the same approach. We'd make sure that fulfillment was coming through to our API layer. And within here, instead of setting this sync object type to what it is currently now, which is list, we can, not listy, but list, we can change that to map. And the final approach that we can take here is to use a document. So a document is more akin to if you wanted to change the whole UI, or almost wholesale, between intents. That might be if you had a relatively static agent interface and wanted to deliver a pretty complete customer profile based on what's captured in the virtual agent part of the conversation, and then maybe one large change to it as they step through the process. A document would be very much the best way to go there. So it's really allowing people the tool sets to focus on what they think is best for that given interaction at that given time. I think that the most important thing to stress is you don't have to kind of commit to one approach for all of your agents across all of your channels. In fact, because we have so much flexibility, you can define a given UI based on a given intent plus any macro or micro information that you have about that given customer. So let's say, you had a gold customer, somebody who's very, very important to your business. The way that you'd present their policy would be ultimately determined by something we know about that person and then what they're looking to achieve today. And quickly you can signify to the agent that this person is extremely important to the business, and the way that the agent would then interact with that person would be very, very different. And that flexibility in the tool set is extremely powerful. But as I said before, we have to be a little bit careful we don't get carried away, and that we do start to incrementally and iteratively build on top of the functionality. So start small, something like FAQ based, and then build on top of that to get more extensive. And as you get good at it, then you can really start to build out these full end-to-end kind of AI-powered agent interactions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do we have any other questions or?
Nothing more coming through at the moment, Tom. So you're obviously doing a very good job at explaining this.
Very good, very good. Okay, so the other few things that I can show you just in the conversation profiles here. So as part of the kind of the rest of the platform, just to give you a bit of an overview of how this state layer and management happens between virtual. We've this part here, so actually providing the agent with the relevant tools, but as important as anything else is to make sure that we have a very seamless migration between any virtual agent conversation and any human agent conversation. So clearly, as we configure our conversation profiles, as I mentioned before, specifying the right dialogue flow agent for your virtual agent part of the journey and for the human agent part of the journey is really, really important. In this particular case, we're using the same one twice. But actually then making sure that we retain the context that happens within the virtual agent part of the conversation and is handed off to the human agent, it is hugely important. And actually, because of the way that the solution is designed, is we take the very same approach to creating that initial interface. So if we had two separate dialogue flow agents and two separate fulfillment APIs, both of them could talk in a single language that would allow them to independently but coherently create an agent UI. So if we were using a different virtual agent here, it can use the same fulfillment templates and the same fulfillment JSON structures to build that UI inside of the virtual agent conversation. So when the task ultimately arrives with the human agent, they have their first kind of information that they need about what's happened in the virtual agent part of the journey. And then the human agent dialogue flow agent would take over, and it can then change that UI that was already created by a different dialogue flow agent during the virtual agent part of the journey. So we have a very, very seamless transition from one to the other, making sure that we retain context. I think one thing that continues to baffle me around the contact center space is how few providers manage to actually retain the information that is collected during that virtual agent layer and then deliver it into the agent interface. So this state layer and the approach to building that agent interface really allows to make sure that that's extremely simple for us to do. There's a few other things, whilst we've got a few minutes now to talk through, is the extra features and functionality that we have within the conversation profile. So the first one obviously is the types of suggestion. I've talked you through FAQ and dialogue flow assist today. There's some advanced kind of features and functions that we have here. This one here is inline suggestions. So we have two ways that we can deliver suggestions to the agent, or perhaps we don't want to deliver them to the agent. So if we want to show, like we have in this case, the UI changed, then we'd have inline suggestions enabled. If you had a use case where you wanted to fire off some other asynchronous event that actually didn't impact what the agent sees or had any real bearing on the conversation at that given point in time, but maybe triggered another workflow somewhere else within the business, you can actually do that through subscribing to one of the pub subs underlined within the application and then creating more complex workflows that way. We can have different trigger models as well. So whether we are listening to the end user, whether we're listening to the human agent, and the reason why that's important is we can actually choose as to whether we ingest the media from both the human agent and the end customer, or just one or the other, and that will impact the way that we design our dialogue flow agents and any FAQ as well. So let's say, for example, we wanted to ingest what the human agent was saying, and we had a given set of FAQs that were specifically for them, so they would know that they could say given keywords that would then go and find information on their behalf, so they wouldn't have to go and do it. So lots of different approaches here, and finally, kind of grouping suggestion responses. So we can actually, if you want, because Flex is Flex in the programmable UI, we have a pretty opinionated version of it to allow people to get up to speed very, very quickly. If you wanted to build your own UI components on top of the underlying framework, you absolutely can do. The primitives within inside of Twilio are the same, and potentially grouping suggestion responses would be one of those options if you thought your agents were getting bombarded with too many FAQ documents when your customers are asking lots of questions in sequence. The last one is around entity extraction, which I think we had a question around before. So actually during the human agent part of the conversation, can we extract entities from within the natural language, both for FAQ and Dialogflow Assist?
So an entity being a name, an address, a date, any specific piece of information contained within a conversation, yeah?
That's right. So using Dialogflow Agent Assist, it will do that automatically through Dialogflow, but if you're using FAQ Agent Assist, then that wouldn't be the default per se.
We've got another question here, Tom. Are there any typical outbound use cases you can talk about on either SMS or voice, so i.e. triggered by an internal process or initiated by an agent?
Certainly, yes. I think one of the most common ones that we'd see, it's probably more focused around the virtual agent part of the journey. But let's say you are sending out appointment reminders or a parcel delivery reminder, and you actually wanted the customer to be able to reply to that and potentially change or amend the information of the appointment or the date on which the parcel would be delivered. We can apply the same approach. So we'd create an outbound message, and when that message was responded to through one of these automation profiles, so let's say if I wanted to create SMS and then find a phone number that I've already got established, click update, whenever somebody would reply to an SMS on that phone number, we would associate that particular phone number with a given conversation profile that then maps directly to a Dialogflow agent that could specifically handle that campaign. So a lot of the flexibility here not just allows us to manage the state between the virtual agent and the human agent, but also to be able to very, very quickly create specific Dialogflow agents or conversational flows for given entry points at a given point in time. So if we wanted to use, a subset of phone numbers for a particular campaign and quickly associate them with a Dialogflow agent that handles a very specific problem, we can do that very, very easily. Again, using the same kind of underlying infrastructure, Twilio as the channel aggregation, and then the Dialogflow agents kind of, you can chop and change them as you wish as to when and how you want to deploy each one of those on a given channel.
And I guess particularly for outbound, you've got lots of compliance and security related issues, and we can equally listen in and make sure that the agent is going through any specific compliance statements, for example, that may be required for an outbound call or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Cool. Great. Thank you. Okay.
I think the other thing that I just wanted to bring people's attention to here was this sentiment analysis, so again, on a given automation profile, so associated with any particular channel and conversation profile, we can actually enable or disable sentiment analysis. So if you had for, I don't know, a customer service or a complaints department, for example, and you thought making sure that the sentiment was easily surfaced to the agent in real time, then you could enable sentiment analysis for those channel configurations and leverage that sentiment through the fulfillment API, and again, update the agent UI in real time during the conversation.
And I guess this is particularly interesting if you think about, as a supervisor, for example, if one of my agents is having a particularly tough time dealing with an angry customer or something like that, it might be that I want to step in and interject, and having the ability to view that real time, whether it be on the voice channel or messaging channels, can be a really, really useful thing to have access to.
That's right.
Sorry, we've got one more question here as well, Tom. What benefits, including handle time reduction, first call resolution, etc., have we typically seen with this kind of deployment?
Really good question. I think, there definitely isn't an industry standard. And we would very much look at this on a kind of case by case, but maybe industry vertical by industry vertical. So we can certainly help whoever asked the question do a bit more analysis, what that would mean for them. I think what we have seen as a broad theme is now the ability to stand these solutions up is readily available. And as you've seen, we've gone within 20 minutes actually enabling channels, assigning them with Dialogflow agents, almost creating the entire Dialogflow agent themselves. The path to getting to that like hello world part of your application is very, very short these days. And what it means is ultimately the business case, therefore, is extremely compelling because we don't have a huge sunk cost just to try and see what benefits we can add. And if we do it incrementally, we can easily extrapolate what we'll get from the first 5 or 6 weeks of effort across the broader business. I think if you were to ask Google what their answer to that question would be, they would say conservatively people should be seeing at an absolute minimum 10% saving across those key metrics, and anywhere up to like 30 to 50% saving, which is pretty incredible. I mean, arriving at those levels does require a lot of time and effort and a lot of focus on the building out the conversational journey itself, but at least the barrier to entry is really quite low now, so you don't have to make sure it works day one. And I think that has probably been the biggest change in the technology set over the last 3 to 5 years. Is historically, if you're trying to deploy these solutions, there'd be a huge infrastructure cost to get there. And what that means is there's a lot of focus and dependency on getting it right first time. And because it's an incredibly difficult domain, we're talking about processing human language, which is hard enough at times between two humans. Asking a machine to do that job is a very, very big task. And I think that the solution to that problem is really around process and approach, and being able to do something simple and expand upon it grows confidence within the business. It actually helps to educate your customers as well, and you can start to really build competency that can then be expanded on. So you remove away this kind of binary aspect of we're going to spend £1 million and it better work or else. It's more like these technologies are an absolute no-brainer for what we believe is the future of the contact center and customer experience. We should start using them now and honing our process around them as the technologies themselves will continue to accelerate in what they can do.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, this is still a relatively new technology to market, but broadly speaking, if your agents are spending lots of time dispositioning calls, if they have complex inquiries, if they're navigating through lots of different screens or referring to knowledge bases, then typically, you can find that this technology will help and will reduce handling times quite significantly. But to Tom's point, the approach to adopting this and testing things out and learning is relatively quick. So we have what we call our eight-week launch program for Agent Assist, which means that anyone can trial this technology out over a relatively short period and figure out what the return on investment and what the business case looks like. And the first thing that we would do there is to look at modeling out the intent. So that's understanding the kinds of questions that customers are asking and mapping an intent to those, a reason for calling. Once we've done that, to Tom's demo earlier on, we can then start mapping knowledge articles and promoting and pushing that knowledge to the agent to help them solve the problem quickly and to prevent putting the customer on hold or navigating through systems. The third step is then looking at automating things like reporting and compliance statements. So that might be automatically dispositioning the call, particularly helpful if your agents are spending lots of time trying to categorize the calls, or you find that those categorizations are pretty inaccurate, which is what we find in most contact centers. But also making sure that agents are stating the relevant compliance messages, which is particularly important in financial services. Step 4 then is looking at things like next best action. So what if a you know, how can you help an agent objection handle or manage complaints, or potentially, you know, if a customer asks to buy something, how can we prompt them with a follow-up action for a next best action? And then finally, you know, as we get deeper into it, we can look at automating navigation through different screens and pre-populating CRM as the demo that Tom showed earlier on. So we're right at the top of the hour now, right on time in terms of finishing the webinar. I really appreciate everybody joining. If you do have any questions, you can carry on posting them in the window here, or either email myself or Tom directly. You'll certainly get access to this recording afterwards so that you can have another look through. But like I say, thank you very much for joining. We appreciate you taking the time out. Please feel free to fire any questions through, and enjoy the rest of this sunny afternoon. Thank you very much.